All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones finale last night. I just recorded a video on anxiety that went a lot longer than I thought. I was going to combine the two videos together, anxiety and depression, but now it's just Game of Thrones because that video went a lot longer than I thought. A couple things. Last night's Game of Thrones finale was fantastic for the most part. It was great. As anyone who knows, following my channel, I have been a huge Game of Thrones fan my whole life, read all the books, and it's my number one nerd obsession. So last night's Game of Thrones, the big takeaways for me. Number one, I just made a humorous video that's on this channel as well about the sex scene with Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. So that had to happen at some point, and it was a very interesting way they tried to show it, while letting the viewers know that it was a slightly incestuous relationship, and at the same time a loving and fated relationship. In much like, Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, we have Jon Snow, aka Aegon Targaryen, we have learned, and Daenerys Targaryen. And everyone wanted this to happen. Personally, as someone who's read the books, I was hoping for Jaime Lannister to somehow team up with Daenerys and have them fall in love, because Jaime Lannister in the books is my favorite character, and apparently that is not going to happen. And it would not have been as exciting for, I think, the most of the public that watches this show. I'd say Daenerys and Jon Snow are two of the most popular characters, maybe even more popular than Tyrion now. Tyrion's been a little more relegated to, Hand of the Queen. He's almost a little more of a side character now, which is fascinating, because when the show first started, Tyrion was the man that made that show great. He's won 2 Emmys for it, even up to season 4. Remember, he had that powerful scene where he was on trial with his family, and it was just one of the most intense performances I've ever seen in television. And he's such an incredible actor. But now it's really kind of shifted as the fantasy in the show has taken a stronger focus to Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen. And it makes sense, because those are the two plot lines that they've been building up from the beginning. Jon Snow at the Wall and the White Walkers, and of course Daenerys and her dragons. It only makes sense they would come together and fall in love. It seems like a good fit, chemistry-wise and storyline-wise. But it it had to happen, and it was just really interesting that they did it. And so that was big. That was big news, as a lot of the world found out that indeed Jon Snow is Aegon Targaryen. Now, I knew he was a Targaryen, but I didn't know he was Aegon Targaryen, even as a book reader. So I don't know if that's just something I didn't remember, or something they just finally said officially. He is Aegon Targaryen. But the story in the books, I always fell in love with the backstory with Rhaegar and Lyanna, because Lyanna was described as just being a very beautiful. In the books, they describe her, I think, as being like a spitting image of Marjorie Tyrell, if I remember right, and which is fascinating. I'll have to double check that, but I believe that's what happened. And anyways, the entire premise of Robert's Rebellion was that Rhaegar had kidnapped this woman he was betrothed to, Ned Stark's sister, the beautiful Lyanna Stark, and Robert raised everyone to go start a war to bring her back. And he defeated Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident, that big epic fight with his warhammer, and Rhaegar, I'm assuming, had some sort of probably epic sword of some kind. And that was how the premise of the entire story of Game of Thrones really started. And they've talked about maybe doing like a prequel in Game of Thrones later that is the prequel story, which I think would be amazing. But that story was always fascinating to me. There was a scene that they talk about in the books that is just so incredibly interesting to me, where Ned Stark's recounting the story from this great tournament. And at this tournament, they had all of these really prominent people from the books. And this is the prequel setting. There was like Robert and Ned Stark. Lyanna Stark, his sister, was there, and then there was, of course, Rhaegar Targaryen. So back when there was more Targaryens around. Elia Stark, and she was who Rhaegar was actually married to. but who he wasn't in love with. Because, that was a period where there was a lot of betrothals and people arranged marriages, but you always hear about these sort of fantasy tales of true romance. So it's like a nice contradiction of the two, because on one hand you have a period where there's a lot of arranged marriages and my betrothed and you will marry this person. On the other hand, it's a time of like almost like medieval days. There's like swords and dragons and I will fight for her and love, and those two ideologies like kind of conflict with each other, and it makes it very interesting. So there's this big tournament and Rhaegar won. Rhaegar kicked everyone's ass. He was described in the books as being like very charismatic and actually a great musician as well, but also an incredible fighter. He was just like the perfect package. It was almost sickening. It was like the perfect fucking package. Apparently he wasn't the best fighter because Robert kicked his ass. But he was the man, and he won this tournament, and they had this tradition where you take the crown of love and beauty, and it's basically like a crown of roses, and you would drop it on the most beautiful woman at the tournament. And of course, if you're married to someone or betrothed, you're gonna drop it on your wife's lap. It's like, if you're a married man and you're in a tournament, you win the Super Bowl, you're not gonna call your mistress out of the crowd and have her up on the podium with you. You know what I mean? You're gonna call your wife and your kids. But what made this so interesting was Rhaegar trotted his horse right by his wife and dropped the crown of love and beauty on the lap of Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna Stark. Now, it's implied, let's put it this way, it's not completely known as to whether they had a relationship at that point or that was his signal that, like, all right, woman, I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And it's cool for a couple of reasons. It's a fucked up on one, I feel bad for his wife because that's fucked up and sad. It's also interesting on a number of reasons because Ned Stark's sister comes from the north. They're sort of like a colder, honorable sort of vibe to the family, and winter's coming. And the Targaryens and their long, flowing blonde hair, and down in the south, and their dragons, and they're a little more like artistically, kind of written sort of. That's how I imagine them. As being a little more like, whimsical. And like the clashing of those two families or ideologies is interesting, and that's kind of what's happening in the show, because of course you have sort of the brooding Jon Snow and then Daenerys Targaryen, and we're seeing how that works. So I think it's cool to watch Jon Snow and the Mother of Dragons to get sort of an idea of maybe what it was like with the original love that started it all between Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark. And I just find their backstory really interesting, mostly because we only get bits and pieces of it. There's a lot of it hidden in George R. R. Martin's secret magical workshop somewhere, or deep in the halls of his crazy beautiful mind. But I've always been in love with that backstory and that premise of Rhaegar and Lyanna, because I knew in the books when I was reading it, Robert's just always running around, kidnapped my woman, I was gonna marry her, fuck this shit. And, Robert was just that kind of guy, very prideful, very much, you're not going to take my wife. Now, what if they did run away together? It was still a risky move. Whether it was love or not, that was a time, and that's probably why they did it. It was a time period where you couldn't just run away with whoever you wanted if you were betrothed, which sucks. You couldn't just love who you wanted to love. And Robert, I think, also being a jealous man, had trouble accepting that. Even in the back of his mind, he might have known that they loved each other and she loved him more than he loved her. Let me rephrase that. I bet Robert knew that Lyanna Stark loved Rhaegar and not him. And I think he had trouble accepting that, because Robert mentioned several times how Lyanna was the most beautiful woman in the world to him, and he started a war for her. And it kind of reminds me of like those love stories, or that friend or family member that loves somebody, but that person doesn't love them back, and they're just tortured by it. Although in this case, Robert was given a reason to start a war over it because of how they ran off together, and it was obviously fantasy in a different time. But I feel like in my heart, Robert just could not accept it. I feel like he knew, probably in the back of his mind, that she wasn't kidnapped. But, any excuse to kill the man that's taking your woman, you'll do. And it's too bad, because in today's modern age, you'd want to think that Robert would just been like, okay, she loves you, she doesn't love me, that's just the way it is. But, in the Game of Thrones world, that's what makes those sort of emotions and those ideologies and stories of love so interesting, is that everything gets magnified and taken in a different direction. So I've always loved that, and they hinted at that in the finale with the tiny little flashback. And I have to say that the guy they used for Rhaegar in the flashback looked curiously like the actor who played the Mother of Dragon's brother in season 1. I'm going to have to go look into that. But it was all great. All that was great. The big twist with Littlefinger was really well done. I was kind of getting irritated by the whole turning Arya against Sansa thing, but they were just doing it to surprise us. And that's fine. Littlefinger had to go. He had to go. He loved Sansa in a kind of a creepy and loving way, but he had served his purpose, and he was just going to cause problems. And he was trying to turn the Stark sisters against each other, and that shit cannot happen. So they did a good job with Littlefinger's demise. That scene, the parlay, or the big powwow, the powwow to end all powwows, with pretty much almost every main character in Game of Thrones after 7 seasons, was just fucking pure bliss for someone like me. Like, literally, within the span of 30 feet, you have the Hound and the Zombie Mountain and Queen Cersei and Jaime Lannister and Euron Greyjoy and Theon and Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen and fucking Jorah Mormont was there. It was Tyrion. It was incredible, and they were all talking. It was like this incredibly tense, beautiful scene, and it was so cool. And of course, they show them that the army of the dead is real, and there's a big sort of the scene where Daenerys. I'm sorry, I always go back and forth on her saying her name properly. I don't care. I should just call her Dany. The scene where Dany arrives on her dragon, and it's the most epic entrance ever. Like, just fuck you guys. I'm gonna show up late and arrive on my fucking dragon. Like, God, it was so cool. And I've really, it's hard for me not to root for them. Like, it could be the actress that plays Cersei or the way she's portrayed in the show. She does a good job making you hate her. But the Cersei I imagine in the books was more interesting to me personally. In the show, I can't help but root for Dany more because of just her storyline and how they positioned her. Even though it's a little more generic, I just can't help it. Now, I will say that Cersei has a crew around her that I just am fascinated by. Like, the Zombie Mountain and his whole black and silver getup is fucking... they're so stylish. They are the most stylish evil posse in all of Westeros. With Cersei and her epic little, dresses and whatnot, and the mountain, and then Qyburn and her little army of Kingsguard. Like, oh, they look so badass. They just look so fucking badass. But it's hard to root for them. It's really hard to root for them at all, which is concerning because usually the people you don't root for cause the most problems. Now, she sent Euron overseas to get the Golden Company, which is something they talk about quite a bit in the books. It's like sort of an army of sellswords kind of a thing. And, of course, she is going to try and figure... I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up with one of the other dragons somehow. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was... Dany has one dragon, you have the undead zombie dragon, and then somehow Cersei gets a hold of a dragon, and maybe Qyburn does something with it. I don't know. I feel like he could shimmy out another dragon there. Or maybe Bronn. I have this theory that maybe Bran, because he's a warg and he can take control of things sometimes, maybe Bran takes control of a dragon with his mind, which would be pretty epic. Bran's got a whole weird thing now. He doesn't seem to be taking over things as much, but he can definitely... Like, now that he's a three-eyed crow, he can, like, go into history and find out all the facts. He's like the fact checker. Like, anything. Like, I didn't fucking do this. Littlefinger's like, I didn't fucking do it. I never did this. And then Bran's just like, bitch, I saw it. I closed my eyes and I saw all the fucked up shit you did. Put the fucking knife up to my father's throat. And I guess everyone just believes him because, he's weird. But so he has that magical power. I'm wondering if maybe Jaime Lannister will now go to the north, because now he's free. He had that really intense scene where he told Cersei to go fuck herself after she called him the dumb Lannister, and once again proved how cunning she is by misleading everyone into thinking she was going to help with the fight against the White Walkers. And that was like the last straw for Jaime, and he was like, fuck it, I can't do this anymore. And then she even threatened to kill him, and he was like, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And he walked right out. And it was really intense because I was like, fuck, the Jaime and the Mountain, if Jaime Lannister and the Mountain start fighting, oh man, this fucking, this could be, I'll lose my shit. I was so tense when that happened. Me and my girlfriend were like, fuck, what is going to happen? You better fucking kill Jaime. But now he's like free. He's free of all those things. And once again, his storyline takes an interesting development. I could see him maybe going up to the north and maybe starting a relationship with Sansa, but that seems a little weird. Poor Sansa. Maybe I could see them getting together, and maybe he just joins the force with Jon. It's a little unknown what he's going to do there, but Jaime Lannister must have a role in this at some point because they're keeping him alive, and his storyline keeps shifting in interesting ways. So I'm curious to see what happens. And of course, Tyrion's a little bummed out. It's implied that he's just a little bummed out. Not that he knows that it's incest, but that, love complicates things. Tyrion can tell you himself. Look at when he was in love with Shae in season 2 and 3. Like, look at the anguish that it caused him and all the difficulties it caused him as a ruler and just as a person. Love fucks shit up. It's a metaphor for life. Love fucks shit up. It's a beautiful thing, but it causes problems and it makes things more difficult. And I think Tyrion understands that Jon Snow and Daenerys getting together is going to complicate things. Yes, they need to be allies, but now that they are passionately in love, we're looking at another Rhaegar-Lyanna situation all over again, and that just complicates shit. But I'm curious. I feel like Tyrion should still be a little supportive. Like, yeah, it's going to complicate things a little bit, but come on. Can you blame him, Tyrion? Like, I don't think he's like jealous or anything like that. Although Jorah does look a little jealous. Poor fucking Jorah. Oh my god. That man, he's like the guy you just can't get rid of. He just loves you so much. He fucking surviving the grayscale. He has to have a good purpose too. Well, he did have a purpose, in the big epic battle protecting Jon Snow. But god, poor Jorah. Poor Jorah. Just another man swooping in there, taking his dream woman. But that's kind of the way it goes. I want to see how they position some of those awkward love triangle things and the tension between people on her side. And there was a couple things that were a little rushed, like Grey Worm just... baby's crying. What's that? Sorry, my baby was crying. When I look at this whole episode, big picture, it was really just about setting up... The reason they formulated this whole idea of bringing a White Walker to everyone was to show everyone crucial in the show how real the Army of the Dead is, because at that point it was just going to be this annoying thing where nobody ever believed it, and it just was already getting irritating. Like, we know the White Walkers are real. We've known it for 7 seasons. Every time someone says it's like fake or a fantasy, like children's tales, like Grumpkins, and it's just frustrating because we know that it's real. So I'm glad that I think this scene conceptually from Martin was designed to show all the major characters that the Army of the Dead is very real, so they're at least aware of it, whether they're helping the cause or not, and that's important for us. And then, of course, it all ended with this dramatic scene where the Night King flies in on his new undead zombie dragon, which looks incredible. You can see all the tattered holes in its wings, and it's blowing like this powerful blue fire. It's kind of mysterious, Some people are arguing, is it ice, is it fire? I really don't know. But he just knocks the wall down, which is something I never saw coming. Like, it's so brilliant when you look back at how this was all constructed in Martin's mind. If he thought about this from the very beginning, like, what's the one thing that could tear a wall down? I can give the Night King a dragon. And like, just how everything's constructed. One of the reasons Game of Thrones is so incredible is because of how everything flows together in such an interesting and unexpected way. It's unexpected when it happens, but when you look back, it all makes sense. And there's so many different tensions between characters you love or hate. It's intense. It's just, there's a lot going on. I don't know how I'm going to wait for the next season. It's going to be impossible. But wow, what an incredible season. I'm hoping that maybe the finale that ends next season will be like a 3-hour-long movie. It'll be 5 episodes of hour-long Game of Thrones and then one epic 3-hour movie to just end it all. But man, it's just incredible. So many interesting storylines to see where they go. So I think that's enough. I think I've got enough of it off my chest. And my baby's starting to cry and get a little fussy. So that means I have to go do my dad thing. So hope you enjoyed the video. Nerd Therapy, Morgan's Madness, Game of Thrones Season 7 finale. And I am out.